Welcome to episode number 214, where I'm speaking with Ayurvedic Doctor Briere about the problem with suppressing natural urges. According to Ayurveda, the suppression of a natural biological and emotional urge is really problematic for our health. So please stay tuned to find out more. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm very happy to welcome back Ayurvedic Doctor Briere, who is the co-founder of the International Institute of Ayurveda. Victor is a gifted pulse reader specializing in Ayurvedic diagnostic techniques and health counseling. His in-depth, individualized approach to health offers clients and students a detailed and encompassing perspective on the underlying causes of imbalance. Victor's approach to wellness emphasizes the role and importance of lifestyle and dietary balance. He offers the support often needed to successfully address the root cause of illness and restore the body to health. Victor, welcome back to the podcast.
I am very happy to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. It's been a little while, and I'm excited for today's topic because I haven't discussed this on the podcast before. I know we've discussed it in that it can cause imbalance, but definitely haven't gone into the in-depth discussion on the suppression of natural urges.
A big topic in Ayurveda, very big and mysterious in a good way.
Right. Yes. So let's delve in. And according to Ayurveda, the suppression of the natural, biological, and emotional urges is really problematic for our health. So I guess let's start with, what are these natural urges?
So the natural urges are natural urges. So we know them as the ones everyone's familiar with are, like, for example, if we have to hold our urine, that's a natural urge, right? To urinate. And that's one that's talked about a lot in Ayurveda, or the bowels and urine, of course, because they have such a huge impact on our overall health. So, at a very young age, we're taught to hold our bowels and urine for extended periods of time. Because we're in school and we're in class and we shouldn't leave class, or we're in the car or whatnot. And of course, that's a good thing to learn, to be able to hold it, so to speak, but we take it way too far. And we often just have developed the subconscious or unconscious habit around holding our urges, those urges specifically, for sometimes hours. And that has a bigger health consequence than people might think. And we can get into the reasons why, obviously. So those are two of the natural urges. Another natural urge is to sneeze or yawn, or pretty much anything that our body tries to do automatically that we have to forcibly stop if we don't want it to happen at that time.
Right, which is a lot that we do when you think of like passing gas or yawning. A lot of those are considered very rude in our society.
Exactly. Passing gas, another big one. Itching is a natural urge. So that's a perfect example. We're sitting at the dinner table, and we have to belch or we have to pass gas and we have an itch and then we need to yawn or whatever it is, whatever thing it is that's considered, beastly or something like that. And we're in company, so we hold it.
Yeah.
And that can go on for a long time and it creates problems.
Right. So let's talk about these problems. So let me just list them and then you can discuss the ones that you want to discuss about the effects on our bodies. So just quickly going through them. We mentioned gas, bowel movements, urination, belching, sneezing, thirst, hunger, cough, sleep, heavy breathing, yawning, vomiting, tears, and semen as well. So
there you go.
Yes. So let's choose some of them and break it down and see what happens when we suppress this natural urge. So where would you like to start?
I think the most important one is bowel movements.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're in an office all day. And,
yes.
I know a lot of people, you don't want to have a bowel movement in the office. So if you don't have a bowel movement before you leave home, or if you need to have another bowel movement throughout the day, you could be holding that bowel movement all day long.
All day long. And what happens is we get the body's smart. So we get the urge to have a bowel movement, but then if we suppress that urge will go away. Or I shouldn't say go away, it will, the feeling that we experience will go away. Mm-hmm. So everyone knows what it feels like to need to have a bowel movement. That's what signals us to go to the bathroom. And then if we hold it, it's like you get that expression, oh, I missed it, so now I can't go. Right. Or now I'd have to force it if I went, because since we're bringing it up now, that's the other problem. Withholding the natural urges then usually results in a situation where you often have to force a natural urge, and that's just as bad, if not worse. So we hold the bowel movement, and then the urge goes away, or we miss the urge, we miss the opportunity. And now, according to Ayurveda, you have constipated yourself. That's the definition of constipation, is your colon needs to clear and wants to clear. It's time for it to clear, and it doesn't, or it can't. And so we've created our own constipation by training ourselves that we basically communicated to our body, don't go, right? Hold it back. Yeah. And we've overridden the natural flow of Vata in this case. So that Vata has to go somewhere. And so it starts going backwards, retrograde. And that's a complex physiological phenomenon. But basically, to just keep it simple, it starts backing up in our system and starts disturbing the other subcategories of Vata, the subdoshas, that are mainly located higher up in our system. The next one, or the one that it affects most when you hold a bowel movement or resist a natural urge, is Samana Vata. And Samana Vata deals with primarily hunger and digestion. And if that goes off, then our appetite gets thrown off. And if our appetite gets thrown off, that means our Agni is disturbed. And anyone who's been listening to your podcast, ears just perked up and said, oh, Agni, well, that's super important, right? So if our Agni gets disturbed, forget about it. Everything's going to go off in our body. So when we resist that natural urge to have a bowel movement, we're running the risk of deranging Agni.
Right. So big issue in the body. So, and like you said, the natural movement of Vata, or the subdosha, is apana vayu, right? Responsible for moving the waste out of the body. So correct. Suppressing that natural downward movement of the energy is going to cause that to reverse, like you said, and then to affect digestion. And of course, if this is once or twice, maybe we can get away with it. But if this is going on a long time, like if you're in an office every day and, day in, day out, it can lead to other problems as well. Like you already said, disturbing our Agni is a huge problem, for our health, but also it can, really affect our other systems of our body as well, right? Because of Vata being responsible for all the movement in our body.
Yeah. And so when we study Ayurveda, or, anything like that. We think we categorize Vata into these 5 subcategories. So Apana Vata being one of them, because there are distinct movements of Vata, and it's helpful for us to think about it that way. But what we have to understand is in the physiology, our body doesn't dissect Vata into those 5 categories to understand it. It's a single flow of a force through our body that manifests in a bunch of different ways. So it can manifest in our nervous system. It can manifest as literal movement of air. It can manifest as pressure changes. Those are all ways Vata manifests in the body. And so when we affect Vata in one area, we're affecting it in every area of the body. Just the only question is to what degree. So obviously at the site where it's affected, where, the primary action is happening, like holding a bowel movement, it's affected most at that site. But then that has a butterfly effect or a ripple effect on the rest of the Vata in the body. People who experience constipation start getting headaches. So it goes all the way to the top of the skull.
Yeah, and you're holding on to toxins in the body. The body is trying to eliminate this waste matter. And so by suppressing that bowel movement, you're holding on to this waste, these toxins in the body. Yeah,
and like you said, 1 or 2 times, not a big deal at all. No problem. It's the chronic obstruction of that, or the chronic suppression of the natural urge, basically forces the body to compensate. And whenever the body has to compensate, then we run the risk of creating problems.
Right. Because if you think of it, Ayurveda says that basically health is nature flowing through the body. So we're disrupting that flow. And like you said a moment ago, that has a knock-on effect to everything else, to all the other energy flow in our body, which is all connected physically and mentally.
Absolutely. So, when Ayurveda says the suppression of natural urges is one of the major causes of disease, then we could just look at something, we could just take our current example and see how that happens in the pathology of a disease. So like if you hold the bowels, we know it disturbs Apana Vata. Mm-hmm. So that creates a disturbance in the flow of Vata, which echoes throughout the system. And Vata rules the nervous system pathways, or flow of information through the nervous system pathways. And so we can make a long story short that by saying if you chronically suppress the natural urge, one pathology, not the only one, and it's not guaranteed that it will happen, but one pathology that might happen over a very long period of time is Parkinson's. And you'll be able to trace it all the way. And not that holding your bowel movements is the only cause of Parkinson's, but it's a contributing factor. And Ayurveda is always interested in the root cause. And so it's going to say, if you want to stay healthy and avoid these major diseases, you have to obey these rules of the body or express your natural urges.
Right. And, we're focusing on bowel movements now. And for anyone that's new to Ayurveda, Ayurveda talks a lot about elimination and particularly about the bowel movements, and considers going without a bowel movement for one day is constipation. And it's very important to observe your bowel movements, to keep track of them, because it is a report card of your overall health, of your body. And like Victor was just saying that as well, the Agni is our powerhouse in the body. It digests our food. It helps us assimilate this digestive juice that nurture all the tissues of the body. So for those people who are new, this is why there's such a focus on elimination, and particularly Agni in the body, because undigested food can lead to ama, or toxins, which is the bedrock for disease. So it often comes back to the Agni, or the digestive fire.
And on those lines, we could take another example. So it's not just Vata, but take the suppression of hunger, or the refusal to eat when hungry. That has a huge impact, yes, on Vata, but also on Pitta and Kapha. And the reason for that is hunger is a cue that our body needs sustenance. And as long as it's balanced, obviously. So if you take someone who, let's say, starts out with a healthy appetite, balanced appetite, the body is signaling them that, okay, it's time to eat. So that means the body starts producing a lot of digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid that then deposits itself into the stomach. If that is ignored, over time, then a few things can happen. One is the body creates all this digestive fluid that does not get used and does not come into contact with food. So it starts to eat the own tissue of the body, especially in the upper GI. That deranges all three doshas. Or if the eating schedule becomes very erratic, then the body starts getting less efficient as to when it sparks its metabolic processes. And so then that can also derange pitta and vata. And for example, if pitta gets deranged, then there's a good chance that you're going to develop an issue with your blood tissue. And then blood tissue circulates throughout the body. And if the blood tissue is compromised, then now other tissues throughout anywhere in the body can get compromised. So just so people get an idea that when you ignore these natural urges, it's not just, oh, I'm disturbing vata for a little bit. It can be any of the three doshas. And the way it manifests in your body is up to the 5,000 factors that, are involved in your life on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And the importance of us understanding that the cycles in our body and the systems in our body, and that it's important for us to be on a regular cycle and to be in line. We've talked about before the circadian rhythms and this 24-hour clock. And the more that we can be on this regular cycle of eating in a certain window, the more our systems of our body will be in sync and will function in this regular cycle, which affects all functions of the body, not just our hunger, but affects us physically, emotionally, mentally. And so thinking of your day as this 24-hour cycle, and that's why we talk about dinacharya, and, Ayurveda gives us all these guidelines of when to eat, how to eat, and so on, because they are so important. And unfortunately, modern world pulls us out of that rhythm very easily. So we really have to pay attention and be disciplined to adhere to this natural rhythm, right?
Yeah, definitely. The natural rhythm has been around a lot longer than our modern society. And it might be hard to get into a natural rhythm at first, but once you're in it, it's great. I mean, it's wonderful. Everything runs so much more smoothly. And it's about, Ayurveda in a lot of ways is about building a lifestyle or creating a lifestyle that allows for a healthy expression of all these urges. That can't be emphasized enough, because we have this bad habit in the modern day of dealing with disease after the disease is already manifested. And it's so much harder, like times a factor of 10 to 100 harder. Right. This expectation that, oh, okay, I'm sick, well, let's just reverse it. And it's like, well, a lot of times it's gone too far. You can't just reverse it. So Ayurveda is a big believer in preventing it. And one of the best ways to prevent it is to express your natural urges.
I'm going to jump in here because we were just talking about the importance of aligning with the circadian rhythms. If you want support around this, around implementing these dinacharya or daily self-care practices, setting up a morning and evening routine for yourself, and understanding this 24-hour clock that you need to align to, or that is helpful to align to so that you can prevent disease, please check out my Daily Habits for a Holistic Health program. It's a 28-day self-paced online program, and I'll put the link in the show notes. And I also want to tell you another way to prevent disease and to eliminate toxins out of the body and bring the doshas back into balance is with regular cleansing. And my next group discounted cleanse is January 21st, 2022. So check out that link in the show notes also, or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Go to the events tab for the group cleanse starting January 21st. Or if you want to do a private cleanse and choose your own dates, then go to the programs tab. Okay, let's get back to my conversation with Victor. Okay, so let's move on to another one. What natural urge would you like to cover next?
Let's cover, we did hunger and we did bowel movement. Should we do urination?
Yeah, that's a big one. I know.
It's a big one.
I could be sitting at my desk just a few feet away from the bathroom and I will suppress it until I just finish this. Terrible.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And, we can hold our urine for very long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tend to do that. So what happens when we hold our urine is one of the ways that the body gets rid of excess pitta and excess kapha. Pitta in the sense that it gets rid of the pitta is a big deal when it comes to blood tissue. And the kidneys are constantly filtering our blood. That's their primary purpose. So the blood runs through the kidneys and deposits excess levels of acidity and waste into the kidneys, which then filter it out, and then it runs down a tube and goes into our bladder. The bladder contains that for a period of time, builds up enough liquid. Kapha is the liquid. Liquid is the kapha part.
Yeah.
Pitta and kapha. And then we urinate. So if we withhold our urine, then we're not allowing for the release of excess pitta that's being carried in the blood out. And kapha, same. So we're holding excess pitta and kapha in our body. That can create a situation where our system is bathed in hyperacidic blood and we hold on to too much liquid, weighing us down. And then the vata component is the non-release. So again, it's the apana vata. And so we build up these wastes in our system, and our body then has to start compensating for that. So it changes our demands for liquid. It changes our demands for food. It might start moving waste products to be released via sweat. That's another channel of release. But then if we don't sweat because we're sedentary or whatever, then it doesn't get released there. That can cause skin irritations, so on and so forth. So you guys get the idea. It's always a domino effect.
Right. And you could go on to cause imbalance, I'm sure, in the bladder and the kidneys, of course. Of course.
And blood sugar levels, right, for the kidneys and all that. And so, we could have a huge list of all the ways that holding urine can potentially affect the body. But we get the idea is that it affects it all. And so we think it's like no big deal. Oh, I'll just hold it. But really, within a few minutes of getting the urge to urinate, you should go. And again, I want to repeat so people don't get nervous. If you have to hold your urine because you're doing something, that's fine. It's when it's happening day after day all the time. That's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then the other side of that, Victor, is people who purposely are not hydrating enough or drinking enough so they don't have to go to the loo.
Exactly.
So you don't have to urinate. That's a huge issue too.
Exactly. And that is very common, especially with people who have their bladder retention isn't as lengthy as maybe the average. So they feel like they have to go quickly if they take in the right amount of fluids, and then they don't want to drink. So there's a way around that. What I typically tell those people, because it's very common, is you can get a lot of your hydration from food as long as your diet's healthy. So if you eat enough vegetables, enough moist vegetables like squash, for example, it's actually a really great way to hydrate your system. You don't have to chug down glasses of water. Actually, a lot of times that's not good for you. So thirst, that brings us to thirst, which is another natural urge, and how to manage thirst. So of course, thirst and urination are completely connected. And if your urination's off, your thirst levels are going to be off, and vice versa. So these natural urges are connected with each other. They're not just these solo events.
Right.
So if one natural urge goes off and you suppress one, chances are you're going to be messing with the wisdom of another natural urge. And if 2 or 3 go off, now the body's just very confused and it requires a reset.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Did you have more to add on that?
Nope.
Okay, great. So I think we can cover a few in one here, and particularly to do with respiration or upper respiratory, maybe covering like the cough, heavy breathing, yawning together, and sneezing Because those are, all upper respiratory urges, and I think they are all, they could be connected as well. So sneezing, cough, heavy breathing, and yawning.
Yeah, the upper respiratory natural urges, of course, are a big theme these days because of COVID floating around. Mm-hmm. So we all know what it feels like to be short of breath. Terrible feeling, awful feeling. Has big impact on within a few seconds, it could send someone into a semi-panic to feel short of breath. So the body doesn't like the suppression of that urge, probably the most out of any urge is the breath. But here's what happens with a good portion of the population these days. We forget, or we train our body not to breathe properly over time. And then our quote unquote normal breath is actually a suppressed breath.
Right. Chest breathing.
Chest breathing. The big enemy of the human being, chest breathing. It is terrible for your body. Terrible. Terrible. I know I've talked about it on other episodes, but if I could snap my fingers and change one thing about everyone immediately, it would probably be the quality of their breathing. So it's that important. And so a lot of people live in a constantly suppressed natural urge. That natural urge has the body's been, I'll just say, twisted basically into maintaining this chronic suppression. And that, of course, can cause all sorts of upper respiratory issues. It can make allergies worse. It can cause headaches. It can create excess mucus. It can affect all your sense organs.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Head, exactly. All of it. And then again, the domino effect then occurs. The reason it's always a domino effect is these natural urges are at a base level of the cause of disease. So it's kind of like the natural urges are like the trunk of a tree. And if they get altered or suppressed, then all the different branches that can come from that tree of suppression are all the different possible manifestations of disease. So we want to avoid this idea that, okay, if I suppress my breathing, then I will get this disease. It's not a one-to-one thing. If I suppress my breath, then I'm opening the door to potentially getting hundreds of different diseases. Which ones I get will determine on so many other things that are further downstream.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, it's coming back to this, you're disrupting the flow in the body when you're doing that. Like, for example, we're talking about yawning. Yawning is just your body demanding more oxygen. So if you're not yawning or you're swallowing a yawn because it's considered rude in our society to yawn, that then you're affecting the oxygen blood flow to the brain. And then, of course, that affects Vata in the body again and has a knock-on effect for everything else.
Yeah, it affects Vata, Pitta, and Kapha.
Right.
And people, when we think of the lungs, we think air, obviously, right? But the lungs are not these empty sacs. They're actually quite full, and there are tons of blood moving through the lungs. And our inhalation is obviously the way we take in oxygen, and not just oxygen, but other things. But exhalation and the quality of exhalation is one of the primary ways we detoxify our system. We don't think of it that way. But so a lot of things get deposited into the lungs to be released from the body through the exhalation. And that's through the blood that runs through the lungs. The blood deposits these toxins, just like it deposits it in the colon. Obviously, it's not fecal matter that's being deposited in the lungs, but other toxins. And when we exhale, we get rid of a lot of stuff, not just carbon dioxide. So if we have a very weak exhalation, we're not detoxifying properly. And of course, if we're chest breathing, our inhalation and exhalation are very shallow, so it's like a double hit. We're not taking in what we need, and we're not exhaling what we need to get out. So it's a big deal. Very big deal.
Yeah. You can see, like you said, the knock-on effect of everything. And again, thinking of the body holistically, that we have to take care of all aspects of our health and certainly not ignore our urges. And one I'd like to really go in depth into, Victor, and you kind of hinted at this earlier, is we've been talking a lot about the physical effects of suppressing these urges, but let's talk about tears. Now, tears is obviously a physical manifestation coming out of the body, but it's linked to emotion. Lots of different types of emotion, tears of joy, tears of anger, tears of sadness. So let's talk about suppressing tears, and in particular, when we suppress tears and suppressing the emotions and how that affects our body.
Right. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about in Ayurveda, because this is, so let's just take, I like examples.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a young man or a boy, 7 years old. I'm making this up, but it's very common. Everyone will kind of resonate with this. 7 years old, and the boy's running around doing the thing, and starts to get in a fight with one of his friends, and he gets really angry and really upset because his feelings got hurt. And he starts to cry, and he runs over to his dad. And his dad looks at him and says, "Okay, boy, don't cry, be tough, be strong, don't cry." And so that kid now starts to do two things. One, attempts to prevent himself from crying, which is hard, but possible. And that, of course, has an immediate physiological effect. You're suppressing the natural urge of letting tears flow. So, it has an effect on the eyes and the nose and the face and head and all that stuff, and further down the body. But what's being communicated by saying don't cry is basically saying don't feel these emotions. Right. Now, emotions are not just these magical mental events that happen that have no physiological correspondence. There's a massive physiological process going on every time we feel an emotion, especially a strong one.
Right. It's energy, right? It's energy talking about the flow. It's energy through the body. Yeah,
it's energy. It's physical. I mean, there's no question about it. It like the easiest one to explain is anger.
Yeah.
So we feel the feeling of anger, and we might have a mental story attached to anger, why we're angry. But in the body, your liver starts literally producing heat. I mean, how much more physical do you want to get, right? So now, then that heat becomes energy in the physical sense, physical energy, and the body has an urge to engage a defense mechanism. I'm now specifically talking about anger. That's what anger is. Anger is an emotional fuel to fuel a defense mechanism to basically get away from a threat. And how we get it, we might want to run, we might want to fight, we might want to, whatever it is. But anger creates physical energy to deal with that. Okay, so now if we suppress that heat that gets created, meaning we don't use that heat to act, we've now officially basically produced a bunch of heat that is not going to leave the body or not get used up, and it's going to circulate through the system. Now, we've contained it. So we've become more like a volcano than we want to be at this point. That won't explode. And everyone knows that, if you get someone angry enough, they will, quote unquote, metaphorically explode. But before they explode, there's a big bottling process going on, a physical bottling process, not just a mental bottling process, a physical bottling process that has big physical ramifications on the body. And the body's going to, magic word, compensate to contain that heat or that energy. And that compensation can come in the form of depression. It can come in the form of erratic behavior. It can come in the form of rashes. It could come in the form of blood diseases. It could come in the form of appetite, extreme appetite or no appetite. It can come in the form of constipation or diarrhea. There are all these ways it could possibly manifest depending on the nuances of that person. But the important thing here is that every emotion we have is a natural urge. So we could imagine how much emotional suppression we all do. And how many natural urges we're all suppressing on a day-to-day basis.
Right, because like you said, from a young age, we're taught not to express emotions, and particular for men in our society, like you just used that example, taught to suppress emotion. It does, like you said, it has a building up effect in the body. And all these emotions which are not expressed, so that energy is not allowed a release, then sits in the tissues, right, according to Ayurveda.
Yeah, and so, there's some terminology or language that we kind of use in the modern day that is not correct, which is, we say, just to shortcut it, we say the emotion is trapped in a part of the body. Mm. That's not really true. That's maybe true in a metaphorical sense. Mm. But what would be really true is that because the emotion has been suppressed, or the physiological pathway that the emotion is paralleling is suppressed, then the body compensates for that in a variety of different ways. And the result or consequence of that compensation winds up modifying, deranging, or weakening certain tissues in the body. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are, archetypal patterns that happens because we're all human. We all have a similar enough body. And so we see themes in the healing world over and over. It's like, oh, someone who suppresses anger has liver problems. Okay, but that's not the only way it could happen. Right. Someone who suppresses anger, it can happen in 1,000 different ways, what problem their body creates. But because it's common enough, we say, or we learn to say, well, anger is trapped in the liver. Mm-hmm. That's okay. But, from like if I were getting serious with trying to help someone recover from emotional suppression consequences, I wouldn't say anger is being caught in your liver. Yeah.
Yeah, because that ama, we talk about these toxins, it can be physical ama, like with a problem with the agni and undigested food, or it can be emotional ama. And as you're saying, it can, depending on where there might be a weakness in your body, whether that weakness is genetic weakness, old injury, weakness in the tissues, it will manifest in different areas of the body, dependent on that person's experience to their life or what their genetic makeup.
Exactly. Right. So, I had a consultation with someone the other day, and she has diabetes. And, we were talking about a young boy being told to suppress his tears. Well, it's just as common for women to be told to suppress their anger. Yeah. I thought it was a perfect example. And of course, it showed up right before we did this podcast. So she has diabetes, and she has been working a lot on expressing her emotions, because that's definitely part of her pathology of diabetes. We've talked extensively about it and the nuances and intricacies of her emotional expression and how she prevents them from happening and how that results in her disease. And as she has gotten better and better at expressing her emotions and becoming clear about how she feels about things, she has made tremendous progress and is basically like 60-70% improved with diabetes pathology. So it's like night and day. I mean, right. So she had a situation where, and she's still working on this. So she had a situation where she was talking to someone who worked for a water company, and they were supposed to have her water turned on, and they didn't turn her water on. So she was talking to a representative, and she was upset. She's like, I need my water on. She wasn't like raging, nothing. She was just kind of like, I need my water on. Can you please turn it on? You guys didn't do what you said you were going to do. And so the person on the other end of the phone line started becoming very passive aggressive with her. Okay. And so she got angry. She said, you know what? Like, this is not okay. You need to turn my water on. She said in an angry voice. So the woman on the other side of the phone said, well, your husband's not even on, your husband's the owner of the account. You're not. So I can't even help you.
Mm.
Okay, so not the end of the world, but kind of an irritating situation. So then the woman from the water company called her husband and basically told her husband that what had happened, and that somehow, some way, told her that the client had gotten angry at her. I'll make up a name just so we have a name. Susie. Susie got angry at her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the husband comes home and tells Susie that he's embarrassed because she got angry at the person on the other side of the phone, for the person from the water company, and that he's embarrassed that she's getting angry at strangers and that it has an effect on him, and that she needs to sign up for anger management.
Okay.
So she goes to get an anger management book. Oh. And the first thing in the book, and it's kind of like an anger management book that's kind of geared towards like, corporate anger management type stuff. And says that basically she shouldn't have gotten angry because she was angry because the person on the other end of the phone wasn't validating her, which is true, but that the divine validates her, so she shouldn't get angry at the person. Okay. So I heard that, and no offense to the writer of that book, but if you wanna create a disease, follow the advice of that book.
Yeah.
That is crazy, in my opinion.
That's some spiritual bypassing, it sounds like.
Big time, right?
Yes.
Now, the reason this is important is Susie was asked and communicated to by many people in a very short period of time to suppress her anger.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't she be angry?
Right.
She wasn't attacking anyone. She wasn't exploding. She wasn't out of control. She wasn't, going off and personally insulting anyone. She was angry because something didn't get done that was supposed to get done. And she's being completely told to bottle it. Shut that down. Don't feel what you're feeling. You're wrong. Right?
Yeah.
That is going to create a pathology. So forget the moral good or evil, whatever, I don't care. As her Ayurvedic professional, I need to encourage her to express that anger.
Right.
Right. Otherwise her blood sugar is going to spike.
Yeah.
And you could look at any diabetes research you want. When someone gets into a highly stressed state and doesn't come out of it, blood sugar spikes.
Because your body thinks you're in a state of fight or flight. So this girl needs to fight. Yeah,
it wants the energy.
Dump the sugar, let's go.
Exactly. And so now, of course, Susie might be carrying baggage and all that stuff, but okay, that's fine. But how many times has she heard that message in her life?
Be a nice little girl.
Be a nice little girl. Smile. Don't embarrass me.
Yes.
Smile and suppress the crap out of your anger. Right. Well, that's going to be a big problem for Susie. And it has been a big problem for Susie. So that's just one example. Now, I mean, emotions are complicated. We have so many every day. And, whether we know it or not, we're probably suppressing a decent amount of them.
Yeah.
And so part of the work of Ayurveda in building a healthy lifestyle is becoming emotionally intelligent about our emotional world. Because they're all natural urges.
Right. Very good point. And yes, like you said, having that awareness around our natural urges and also the awareness of how we express our emotions. How would you suggest that people, our natural urges like bowel movements, urination, I think having awareness, just paying more attention to that is easier. But how would you say that people get in touch with their emotions or how they're expressing their emotions? How would you suggest that they create more awareness around that?
Start talking. The conversation about that's another thing people suppress. They suppress their urge to speak a lot. even the idea that I should spend time and resources talking about myself can be threatening to a lot of people, especially when it doesn't have immediate direct results.
Right.
It's I've had a lot of people say that to me. It's like, the fact that I'm even here spending money when I could be spending it on my family or something like that, that guilt feeling, is very dangerous, because if we don't understand our emotional landscape, then it obviously creates problems. We just talked about that. But talking to someone who's neutral, who doesn't have a horse in your race, can be extremely helpful, because they're going to start helping point out maybe where you took wrong turns or suppressed emotions when you got bad advice. Like in the case of Susie, her husband gave her the bad advice that she needs to manage her anger, which basically means suppress her anger in this case. That's bad advice,
right.
And full of agenda of his own. So that's not the person to talk to about that. You got to talk to someone who's more neutral about it. And it's not even super important that you get a bunch of advice. What's more important is that you begin your self-exploration and take that seriously, and start to understand why and where all these emotions are coming from, and when they've been twisted into something they're not. Meaning, our desires become twisted when we can't get really what we want, so we just go for something that we can get but isn't really it.
Right. Like you could be angry at something else in your day, and then it could come out in another way with somebody else, so it's not related to the original source of the anger.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anger is always a good one, because anger can trigger conflict, and a lot of people are afraid of conflict. So, I'm really angry at my friend, but I'm afraid if I express that anger, my friend won't talk to me anymore. So I go to the gym and I punch a punching bag. Well, okay, that's good. That's fine. That might help a little bit, but you never really expressed yourself. So the root of that anger is still present.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, is your anger towards your friend, is it first-hand anger towards your friend, or is it second-hand or third-hand anger that's something else behind that? Of course, that's like a peeling back the layers, but it is good to get curious about that. And when you're feeling the emotion, to let the emotion flow through you, I think, use the breath to calm the body, but experiencing the emotion at the same time. And being curious about it, and maybe even writing about it, or writing about, like, being curious about, where is this coming from? Is it this situation in front of me, or is there something else behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. And with any emotion, not immediately taking the line of, well, I need to get this out of me. It's wrong that I have this inside. It's not wrong. It's an emotion. Right. It's morally neutral. And yes, the exploration of it is absolutely crucial. Where does it come from? Why is it there? What's really bothering me? Really? And that could be hard to answer. And a lot of times it could take help.
Right. Exactly. It can. Yeah. But I think having the awareness around the emotion, and notice when you're feeling it, also the awareness around where you feel it in your body, how it's manifesting, and just that curiosity of, like, wow, I'm getting really irritated by this situation. I feel it in my stomach. I feel it in my shoulders, or, and just being really curious and watching how you're reacting to this, using your breath to help calm that energy, but also taking some time to reflect on it and being curious about, where is that coming from? What triggered me, and what can I learn from it?
Absolutely. And so that I can express that natural urge in a very healthy way.
Because it's fascinating to watch it.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. Very, very, very incredible wisdom to cultivate and possess, is that how I encourage my emotions to flow through my body and me. Right. And how I express them is a whole world unto itself.
Yeah. Feel myself get triggered by something. I'm like, what is it in that triggers me so much? And then dissecting that.
Right, and that trigger, so that's a good word. And because that trigger doesn't always make sense.
No.
It just is. That trigger, that feeling is very physical. People need to remember that.
Yeah.
That's not, we've done this terrible thing in the modern day of separating the mental from the physical. And so like I nails on the chalkboard for me is hearing someone say it's all in your head. It's like, that is like, I think one of the worst phrases that has come about in the last however many years. I wish no one would ever speak that sentence again.
Well, it's just, disassociating with your feelings, it's just disregarding, I should say, your feelings.
And on a physical level, what that means is you are consciously communicating via your nervous system to shut down certain channels of information that connect the fully embodied experience of visceral feeling to the stories to your personal dialogue. Let's say that. You're learning to create a void in your body between those two things. And that is a terrible, terrible thing to create. Don't do that.
Right, because ultimately when we zoom out, right, Victor, we're zoomed in on a lot of these suppression of urges and it's been fascinating. But when we zoom out, it affects our intuition and our consciousness.
Oh my God, incredibly so. Absolutely. We're supposed to be entirely integrated on every layer. That's yoga, integrating fully, 100%, no gaps. And that is not strongly encouraged. In our and it comes out in big ways and it comes out in small ways all over the place. And so waking up to that world of how much we're asked to suppress can be a rude awakening, frankly, because it's all over the place. But very important to wake up to that world.
Yeah. So encouraging you listeners as we finish up here to bring more awareness to your natural urges and see if in fact you are suppressing them and how you can change that. And in particular, any suppression of emotions and being really curious about those emotions, those triggers that come up and allowing yourself, that to flow through your body using your breath, your pranayama to bring your body to a calm place. So it's not affecting your body physically, but also taking note of what is it behind that emotion? What is it that's causing that to be really triggered in me? Any other advice, Victor? Yeah,
the building of a lifestyle is, I think, crucial for this. Like, just one last example, because I think it relates to a lot of people. I talk to people all the time, and it's like, okay, we know from just studying Ayurveda that lunch is the most important meal of the day. And so what I encounter all the time with clients is to say, okay, so let's talk about lunch. Oh, I skip lunch. Okay, why? Because I only get a half an hour for lunch and I don't have time to really, I could pack some fruit or a sandwich or something, but basically I eat while I work. Okay. So there are probably about 6 natural urges being suppressed in that one sentence.
Right.
And it's like, you can't just ask that person to say, okay, we'll quit your job so you get a longer lunch. But that's just an example of how the culture we've developed suppresses our urges.
Yeah.
It's normal for someone only to get half an hour for lunch. When you think about it, that's kind of crazy. And so, when we look around at our world and we look at even driving in a car, all that stuff, it happens a lot. And we can do our part to cultivate a different lifestyle. And the more people who do that, the more people who push against that, the more it will end up helping everyone who maybe doesn't have an opportunity to push against it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to make this more of the normal way to live. And particularly for those of you who have children, encourage them not to suppress their emotions, I think is important. Start them young on respecting their body.
Yes, definitely. And don't tell little boys not to cry, please.
Yes, and don't tell girls to smile all the time.
Don't tell little girls not to express anger.
Okay, Victor, as we finish up here, if there's anything else you want to add, I think you covered a lot in this podcast episode, and thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just that, no, there's nothing. I'm good. I'm clear. I've expressed my natural emotional urges in this episode.
Good. Yeah. Good to hear. But also I want you to tell people where they can find out more about your offerings, your new school. Please share all, and I will put all the links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, sure. You can reach me at International Institute of Ayurveda. So the website's www.iiayurveda.com. Email is reception@iiayurveda.com. And we are launching our school January 2022. So whenever this episode airs, it's going to be around there. We are starting our Ayurvedic practitioner course. It's certified, NAMA approved. And even if we start January 9th, but even if you don't hear about it until a little bit later in January, there's still time to sign up as long as it's before February. We have 3 slots left. So if you're interested in training as an Ayurvedic professional and starting a career in Ayurveda, then that's a great course, and I'm happy to talk to you as much as you want about it. We have other offerings, so always just feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to share what we got going on.
Great. And your programs are online?
Online. The practitioner program is online primarily, and then there's one in-person component.
Wonderful. Great. So very exciting, Victor.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, as always, great conversation. Thank you so much, Victor. I truly appreciate it. And best of luck with the school starting in January 2022. I'm very excited.
Thank you so much, Colette.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Take good care of yourself. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Victor Briere. Please check out the show notes for the link to iiayurveda.com and the email reception@ayurveda.com. And also in the show notes, you'll find the links to the 2 items I mentioned earlier, my online Daily Habits for Holistic Health program and the upcoming discounted group Digestive Reset Cleanse is starting in January 21st, 2022. So check out those links in the show notes. And if you thought that this episode would be helpful to family or friends, I would appreciate it if you would share it with them so we can share this wisdom of Ayurveda. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.